Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's very nice to see all of you. I can see some of you, but it'll be very nice to see all of you at some point. My name is Mallory Marsh, and I'm the Associate Director of Education at the Crocker Art Museum, and I manage the Docent Training Program. I'm very happy to have all of you here with us today to learn a little bit more about what the training program entails, and then answer some questions for you along the way and at the end. So our time together today is going to include a great deal of information. We're going to do a brief history of the museum, talk a little bit about what education at the Crocker looks like. We'll give you a history of docents and the Docent Council. We will also talk a little bit about the effects of COVID-19 on the museum and docent training. Then we'll get into what docent training and docents, and we'll end with a question and answer period. We have a few people joining us today. I introduced myself, I'm Mallory. We're also joined by another staff member, Stacy Shelnut-Hendrick, who is the Director of Education at the museum. And we have 3 docents here as well. Betsy Inchowski is the President of the Docent Council. Robert Muntank is the Vice President. And Sam Reep is the Training Coordinator for the Docent Council. So you'll hear from the 3 of them as well. Just a few logistical notes about our time together this morning. We are going to control much of what you see on your screen. So you should see our slides for most of the time, and then the little face in the corner of whoever's speaking will switch out as we take turns talking. We have somebody controlling the sort of back end, doing audio checks and monitoring the chat. So if you need to ask a question or think of a question at any point, there are 2 things you can do. You can do a virtual hand raise within Zoom if you know how to do that. You can also write your question in the chat, and Michelle on the back end will have that and then bring it up to us when we get to the Q&A session at the end. We're going to keep most of you muted during the beginning portion where we cover the slides, and then we'll unmute people as we start to discuss during the question and answer portion at the end. We are going to open this program like we open many programs at the museum with a land acknowledgement. So while we cannot be at the Crocker today, we do acknowledge that the museum is on the traditional land of the Nisenan people, and the current state of California is the homeland of many tribes. The museum is honored to be here and acknowledges its responsibility to these Native nations. The Crocker is committed to working with and learning from Native people as it moves forward as an inclusive institution. I'm going to invite Stacy Shelnut-Hendrick, the Director of Education, onto your screen to do a few slides about the museum. Good morning, Stacy.
Good morning. I hope everyone is doing well today. I'm not sure if you can see me. Can you see me?
We can see and hear you.
It's so hard to do this via Zoom, but
it's very strange.
It is very strange. Right now, I'm at the lovely Lowe's buying mulch because it's on sale, $5 for $10. This is your docent open house tip of the day. The Crocker Art Museum is an amazing museum, and I'm so happy to be the Director of Education there. One of the reasons why I'm so committed is the mission of the museum is really centered around people and really connecting people and art together. Many museums have a history of focusing on their collection and their mission being a place to conserve and take care of art. And I love that the Crocker really is clear that they do that, because art should be available to people to inspire, encourage, and help us connect as humans. So, next slide. The museum's history is a rich one. Many people associate the Crocker with E.B. Crocker, who, of course, was made wealthy via the expansion of the railroad. But Margaret Crocker was the one to actually give the museum to the city. And she is very much associated with both philanthropic as well as human-centric services. along with giving the museum to the city. They were very much responsible for the public library system. They had a home for young women who needed support. And so Margaret is the one that I love to make sure everybody knows about in relationship to the museum. And who we are. So the Crocker, as you know, serves a very wide span. Essentially, the region of Sacramento has only one major art museum. If you go to Stockton, you get to Hagen. If you go toward Reno, you have a wonderful museum there. But if you can just think about that, really Fresno, Hagen, Reno are the only other art museums in the area. And the Crocker, related to art, history, any other type of museum, is the one accredited museum in Sacramento. The collection has grown over time. We started working with mostly California art because of the collecting interests of Margaret and EB, but we have expanded that collection to include European, Asian, African, and Oceanic works. One of the things that we are very much focused on is being the place to collect California art. So, the American Association of Art Museum Directors does a ranking every 2 years. And in this organization, they include about 220 top museums in the country. And you have to sort of be invited to be there and of a certain status. And the museum participates in a survey that they do every 2 years. And we're ranked 7th in ticketed public programs. And that's really huge when you consider our size and also our demographic that we serve. So 7th in public programs gives you a sense of how many public programs we do. And the docents play such a key role in that. And I should say that we could not do anything pretty much without the docent population. From our ArtRx program to Art for Meditation, docents play a very pivotal role in all that we do. 64th in size, a few years back, we had an expansion and that allowed us to increase in our size. But one of the things that I think many people don't realize is that not only are we I want to say that medium-sized museum for our region, we have a huge membership base. So we have about 10 to 12,000 members at any given time. And based on our region and our size means that we are really often sort of punching above our weight. And so we're excited that we have so many people who are willing to be associated with us in that way as well. And then gallery space. We include the historic wing in that gallery space. We are very much trying to both integrate and contextualize some of the art that the Crocker has. And so in the Teal family building, you have much more of a austere, regular type of gallery setting. But then in the historic building, we have works that are integrated into the architecture of the building. And then we really focus on being of service to the community. A lot of what we do is about not only offering people a respite and a place that they can enjoy art, but trying to be really central in their world and show that we care for our community, and do that by connecting art and people in very real and substantive ways. We, through our school programs, serve about 35,000 young people, and then another additional 25,000 through other types of programs. And then, as I said earlier, in relationship to the AAMD statistics, we offer a ton of programs each year. And that goes from docent public tours, which the docents offer about 12 tours a weekend, free tours for people who come to the museum, to like concerts and jazz and all of that. And then, yeah, we have more than 100 studio art classes. And that's a program that we started expanding once we opened the new building. To follow up, we have 5 specific key areas that we focus on. Just mentioned studio art classes. That is really important in the sense that we want to give people an opportunity to be creative, and that spans from chocolate tastings to creating with yarn, and we do almost anything and everything in our studio art classes. We also have a strong All About Families program, which we started about 8 years ago, which focuses a large part of its energy on early childhood, ages 0 to 5. Our adult programs, in which we include the Docent program as one, focuses on adult education and in trying to expand opportunities for adults to continue to be engaged and exercise sort of their intellectual prowess, as well as community art engagement programs. And that means that we are very much focused on communities that may not come to the museum and see it as a resource for them. A few years back, we started a program called Block by Block, and Block by Block allows us to really make sure that the museum is of service no matter whether people come through its doors or not. We have focused our energy there in the Promise Zone areas for the last 2 years, and we continue to work with that program and expand where we serve the different citizens of Sacramento. And last but not least is school and teacher programs. School and teacher programs tends to be the bread and butter of most museums, in that they very much think about how the museum can help support art education, which is sadly decreasing in public school systems, and make sure that children not only learn about art and history, but also learn about art and history in a way that's very relevant to their world. And so we're really excited to be able to say that we serve children both at the museum through tours, as well as offsite through programs like the Art Arc and Artists to Go, and then the Docent program, Crocker to Go.
Thank you so much, Stacy.
Thank you.
Good luck with your mulch. We're going to switch over now to Betsy Inchowski, the Docent Council President, to give you a little history of the Docent Council at the museum. Hi, Betsy.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Crocker. The purpose of the Docent Council is to provide interpretive educational programs for the Crocker Art Museum, currently made up of over 130 people, 130 docents. We are a volunteer and educational service group. The council itself was initiated in 1963 by a group of 29 junior league members. That's a sort of a national organization of young women doing philanthropic work in various communities, a lot of it related to the arts. But prior to that, back all the way to 1888, there was a volunteer ladies museum association that conducted tours and had tea parties and events at Crocker. So there's been a continuous volunteer movement of people that are giving tours, but not as organized as the Docent Council became, with a total training course and a 9-month training program in art history, art theory, touring techniques, and the Crocker collection. And that's what you're signing up to be interested in today, is a more structured, education-focused kind of organization. Oh, the council operates within the education department. We work closely with the education department and always working hand in hand. And we are the kind of the voice that communicates to the rest of the docents about what things we've come up with. And we are a link between the museum and the public, trained to interpret the collections, exhibitions, architecture, and the history, and to a diverse public. More and more, we're concerned about the diversity of our community and including everyone, which we've been doing a pretty good job in recent years, but we're continuing to work on that. Docents have a working relationship with the education staff, a very positive working relationship and very integrated. The Docent Council is jointly managed by the Education Department and the Docent Council Board. Board members are elected by the members of the Docent Council, and we on the board are kind of the front line communication between all of the docents and the education department.
Thank you so much, Betsy.
Oh, you're very welcome.
So in addition to touring and the board, the Docent Council has a number of initiatives and committees that people work on. So I'm going to invite Robert Mundhank onto the screen to talk about our Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Access Committee. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning, Mallory. And good morning, everyone. I hope, oh, good, we're here. Okay, I didn't see my image there, so I wasn't sure I was on.
We can see
let me
and
tell
hear
you a
you.
couple of things about me first. I mean, I've been a docent for 4 years. I just finished my 4th year. And I've enjoyed it immensely, largely because every time I do it, it's new. Not because the paintings and sculptures change that much, but because the people I tour change. And so the responses are different. And I think you'll find as you go through this program and as you start touring, you'll find the same thing, that it is a lot of fun. But another thing that I do, since I'm vice president, most people, I guess, think of vice presidents kind of like Mike Pence, where your main job is to kind of stand in the background and look like you're awake. But here, actually, I've got a job. And the job is to manage a committee that's called the Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Access Committee, which is a mouthful. So we usually just call it the Diversity Committee. And I want you to look at that purpose statement, because I think it's really important to understand that when we talk about diversity, first of all, we're talking about racial and ethnic and gender and work experience and age diversity, any number of different types of differences among people are important to us, because that way we better reflect the community. And that's why the purpose statement that we have is actually dual. On the one hand, we want to develop a more diverse docent community, but we also want to make sure that that docent community is able to welcome and include the people it tours. So it goes both ways. On the one hand, we want diversity within the docent group, but on the other hand, we also want the docent group to be able to deal with all sorts of different types of people from the community, so that we literally reflect our community. And so what the committee works actually with 3 different work groups. The first one is called Outreach, and that is the outward focused one. It has to do primarily with connecting with various groups, to understanding various groups, and as you can see in that first example, using things like the land acknowledgement to suggest that in fact we know the Crocker's history and we know California's history. Also, though, if you look at the last one, the other thing that's really important is we want to be as accessible as possible to people. Right now, we conduct tours in English, Spanish, and American Sign Language. We will probably fairly soon in the future be looking at expansions in other areas. But that's part of the goal of this committee. How do we do it? The second is continuing education. I mentioned before that we want our docents to be as responsive to and understanding of the needs of the community at large. And so the continuing education program, we have these monthly colloquia, many of which are focused on new exhibits, but we're also including a number that deal with diversity issues. Last year, I would call it primarily sensitivity training, getting people up to speed on things like implicit bias. Next year, it's going to be different. I mean, we'll still do things like that, but we're also going to be focusing on practical issues. So we'll be doing things like case studies where issues come up in a touring experience, and we try to figure out how to deal with those issues. And then finally, you are the result of the work of this work group, at least partially, because we decided to get a more diverse docent population, we need obviously to recruit different types of groups as well as the regular members of the Crocker. And so that's what we've been doing. It stopped short obviously in March when everything stopped short, but it did focus on getting people as much as possible from various backgrounds. And so that's basically what the committee does. And so far, I think we've made some real progress, but I'm looking forward to making more.
Thank you so much, Bob.
Sure.
Before we get into the meat of the training class, I'd like to invite Sam Reap on screen. Sam is the training coordinator on the Docent Council Board. So Sam and I work mostly on the docent class. So it's a joint effort between him and I. And he's going to come on screen to talk about the qualities of a successful docent. Good morning, Sam.
Hi, good morning. I'm glad to be here with all of you. I don't know if you can see who I've got with me. Let's see. Yeah, here he is. One of my fur babies. Yeah. So my name is Sam Reap. I am the training coordinator, meaning once you become a docent trainee and you're in class, you'll be with two people, Mallory, who you just heard, and me. I love working with the training class, primarily because I have such wonderful positive memories of my own time as a trainee. It's a fantastic experience. I can't tout it highly enough. I've been a docent now for 8 years, plus 9, I guess, if you consider the year of training that came before that. And I love it as much today as the day that I started. Can't speak highly enough of it. But I'm wondering if you guys are thinking, I hope you are, going through your head trying to think if being a docent, if you would fit in the docent population at the Crocker. Truth is, there is not one specific kind of person or one specific personality or even one work experience that makes you perfectly suited to be a docent. There's room for everybody. We have scientists who manage to incorporate science into their touring. We have a lot of teachers who are great at touring, but we also have artists, we have lawyers, nurses, midwives, anything you can imagine. However, we have managed to identify what we think are some typical qualities that can make for a successful docent. So I'm going to go through some of these, and as I'm explaining them, try and see if you can see yourself reflected in any of these qualities that I'm going to tell you about. First, you need to have the ability to speak in public. I know a lot of people think of this as their biggest fear, but as a docent, you're going to need to have the ability to express ideas logically, dramatically, and audibly. It's something we can work on. It's something that we're going to talk about in class. We're going to train you to do it, but just know that that is a big part of the job. We also strive for accuracy. The information that we dispense should be correct, or as correct as you can possibly get it. However, a docent should never be afraid to admit that they don't know something. Rather than wing it or make something up, we prefer that you say, you know, that's a really good question. I don't know. I'll have to check on that. We also need you to be a lifelong learner. Docents tend to be lifelong learner types. Docent training sessions are a source of information. However, self-motivation and supplemental reading are necessary as well. I love that part of it. I love the research and I love digging in deep. We're never through learning. This year, more than ever before, you're going to need to have some comfort with technology. We all know what's going on, and we know that being a docent moving forward is going to involve some more virtual touring than it ever has in the past. Of course, we're going to train you to do that, but if you're a complete Luddite, be aware there's going to be some technology involved this year. Enthusiasm is key. People on your tours, both kids and adults, absolutely pick up on your mood. If you're excited about what you're doing, they'll be excited about it. Conversely, if you're just going through the motions, you can drag a tour down very easily. So we want you to be the type of person who can be enthusiastic about what they're talking about. As a docent, you are part of a team, so it's very important that you be dependable. You need to show up when you say you're going to show up, and show up prepared so that you aren't the weak link in your group. It's also important that you be punctual. You have a shift that you'll be assigned, a 2-hour shift. You need to be there on time, actually a little early, so that you can plan what your tours are going to be and stay afterwards to debrief. But it also means that you be punctual in terms of the training classes. We need you there on time because there's going to be a lot of information coming your way. It's also important that you, as the face of the Crocker, which is what you will be as a docent, that you understand that diplomacy and tact are very essential. You're going to meet a lot of people with ideas different than your own, and it's important that you handle all your interactions with them in a diplomatic and tactful fashion. Sense of humor is key. Everything doesn't always go as planned. It almost never goes as planned. So it's really important that you approach things with a sense of humor. But this next one, flexibility. If I could boldface this and put it in all caps, I would, because in my opinion, flexibility is the most important quality for a docent. The successful docent is able to change their technique to suit the audience and the occasion. It goes without saying that a love of art is necessary. It's a quality that every docent must have. But listen, I'm not saying you need to have a great knowledge about art. We're not only looking for art history makers here. I say a love of art. We can teach you about the art that's in the Crocker's collection. We can teach you about the various art movements throughout history. But a love of art is something that you really need to come armed with from the beginning. It's also important that you be an active listener. In the old days, a docent would stand and pontificate in front of a piece of art. You in the audience just stood there quietly and listened. That's not the case anymore. It's much more a conversation with your tour guests. And it's actually much more important what they have to say even than what you have to say. So it's important that the docent's role is to understand and listen for the interests and opinions of her or his visitors. It's the trainee's role to listen to your mentor, we'll talk about that more in a bit, and your teachers, and to learn how to docent.
Thank you so much, Sam. We're going to see Sam in again in another couple minutes when we get into more talk about the specifics of this training class. We're going to take the next 2 slides to talk about the effects that COVID-19 is having on training and the museum. We will begin this training class in September online. The class will graduate in May. Sometime between September and May, we will incorporate some in-person activities into the class. So it will be eventually a combination of online and in-person activities. Now that's going to look like small optional meetups in the beginning, maybe some group work, which again will be optional. But at some point before you graduate, you're going to have to be in the museum doing some practice and some observation. Now for the technology end of things, we're going to have to recommend some hardware for you to use to get through the training class. You're going to need at least a smartphone, which I'm assuming all of you on Zoom have, figured out Zoom to some extent. So watching things on your smartphone are going to be just fine. But you are going to need to have probably a tablet or a computer in order to type up and submit homework assignments or do research. The software that we use, so the programs on the computer, we do most of our communication via email. Online, we use a few different softwares. So we use Volgistics, which is how we track our volunteer hours. It's also how you will be applying to the program. So you'll be using it probably before you even know you're using it. And then we will train you on how to use the program further as a trainee and as a docent. We also use Dropbox to share files and research and checklists and things like that. So that's another one that you're going to want to be aware of. And then some kind of streaming software. Right now we're using Zoom. We are looking into the capabilities and possibility of using Google Classroom as we progress into the class. But again, for any of this, we will provide you with training and support along the way. So don't let that part scare you. Many people have adapted to using these technologies, but we do want you to know that that's going to be a required component of the class. We recognize and acknowledge that the hardware and Wi-Fi recommendations can be a huge barrier for people participating in the class. We are working on strategies with the Docent Council to assess the need and provide hardware and Wi-Fi so people can participate. So you may see a question on your application about supports you might need. So computers, Wi-Fi, access to these things. That's us assessing the need for what we can provide trainees in the class, because we don't want the sort of recommended or required hardware to be a barrier for anybody. So I don't have a concrete answer on that yet, but know that we are aware of that barrier and we are trying to work through it. Now, we've all learned in the last few months that the effects of COVID-19 change day to day or week to week. So all I can speak to now is where the museum is currently and where we are heading in the next few weeks. But I point out these different facts on the screen so you can get a sense of the direction that the museum is headed in. So the museum currently and will continue to follow all current city and county health and gathering guidelines. We will be opening the museum in the next few weeks with strict capacity limitations. So to give you an idea of what we're looking at right now, given the number of people we are going to admit and the size of the museum, it's going to give approximately 50 square feet of gallery space per visitor that we admit. So you can see that we are erring on the side of caution to give people the space that's required. All staff and visitors will be required to wear masks upon entry into the museum. If people do not have a mask, they will be provided. The museum has been using and will continue to use extensive cleaning protocols. Those protocols and service logs will be made available to anybody upon request. Any staff, docent, or member of the public can request to see those documents, and those will be shared. We are also collecting more extensive contact information for everybody that enters the building in the event that we need to go back and do contact tracing. Those are a few things that I can share now that hopefully give you an idea of the direction that the museum is headed in and the way we will continue to evolve with the training class and with visitors as the virus evolves. The next few slides are going to talk specifically about the training class that will start in the fall. The main requirement and most important requirement of training, docent training at the Crocker, is that you attend the training sessions. This class will see 20 sessions in total. We only allow 1 permitted absence during the training period. So one of the first things you're going to want to do before applying to the program is to check all the dates of the classes and make sure that heading in, you're able to commit to those. Now we know that things happen, things come up, and we try and work with people if they become ill or emergencies arise, but participation in all or most of the classes is incredibly important. This class is going to start on September 3rd and will run through May 20th of next year. We are taking a break the 3rd Thursday in December in observance of Hanukkah, but otherwise, every 1st and 3rd Thursday between that date period, we will be meeting either online or maybe eventually in person. The classes are in the evening from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m., and there's usually a short break in that time period. In addition to those evening classes, there are going to be 3 Saturday sessions. So it's still 20 in total, 17 evening, 3 on Saturdays. We do have the dates for those. It'll be November, January, and April, and those are going to be most of the day. So those will be sort of intense sessions from 10:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. The exact dates, like I said before, will be sent to you in advance of the application, so you'll have them and there won't be any surprises before you apply. In addition to attending classes, there will be homework and reading required in between most of the classes. You will also need to participate in the required evaluations and assessments. So right now there are 4 during the training class, and they are on like a steeped or a stepped sort of tiered system. So the first one, you talk about 1 work of art to your peers in the class. The second one, you'll compare and contrast 2 works of art to your peers in the class. At the time we get to the 3rd one, you're doing a joint tour and you're doing it with real visitors. And then we culminate the end of the class with a full tour with real visitors before you can graduate. So you will be asked to participate in required evaluations. You're also required to maintain a current museum membership. There is also a fee for the training class. Scholarships are awarded to anybody that asks for them in the application period. There is no fee to apply or interview for the class. The fee is due upon acceptance into the training program. Currently, that fee is $250. Half of that goes to the Docent Council Board. The other half is held and returned to you after you complete training and tour for 2 years. Again, We provide scholarships for anybody that needs us to cover or waive the cost of that training class. Just indicate on your application that you're interested in a scholarship. As far as what is covered in the training class, this is an idea of some of the content. We break our pedagogy into 4 main areas. The first is art history and art interpretation, and that is focused on the collection of the museum. So we will cover European, Californian American art, the architecture of the museum, abstract art, African, Osmat, and Oceanic collection, the Asian art collection, master drawings, and contemporary art. We will also cover education theory and pedagogy, including storytelling, theater techniques, the elements of art and principles of design, object-based learning, the inquiry method, touring with a big idea, the California State Content Standards for public schools, and then different strategies like visual thinking strategies, artful thinking, technology components like touring with an iPad, and then logistical components of working with schools like classroom and group management. We will also cover visitor service and museum protocols specific to the Crocker. So you'll learn about theories of 21st century museums, visitor motivation specific to the museum, customer service standards for the Crocker, touring visitors with different abilities. You'll do building tours of the museum and also go through safety and security tours. You'll also do a good amount of observation and practice during and outside of your class time. So you will observe school tours, adult tours, intergenerational, which is like family tours like you see on the weekend, and then slow art. Sam, I'm going to kick it back over to you to talk about some of the other aspects of the training program.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about what some of the things that the docent training will provide for you. First of all, it's going to prepare you to meet the standards of service and quality that the museum demands. You're going to come out well-trained, we promise. It's going to familiarize you with the museum's collections, educational programs, and the museum's philosophy. And when I say it's going to familiarize you with the museum's collections, I want to stress that we're not going to be talking about art history in the most general sense. It's going to be a targeted training where you're going to learn about the art movements that our museum's permanent collection contains. We're going to talk about California Impressionism versus French Impressionism, for instance. We're going to pair each of you with a veteran docent mentor. This person's function is to hold you by the hand, essentially, and guide you through the entire process. There will never be a time when you feel like you're left dangling in the wind, not understanding some specific part of the training. This person will help you in every step of the way throughout the training process to make sure that you have the benefit of their experience. An important thing, though, is that being a docent is going to give you a chance for a great deal of personal growth. I hadn't actually counted on how important that part of it's going to be. It was for me. I think every docent will agree with me on that. But it also gives you a chance for a lot of community involvement and service. You get a chance to give back to this community and give back to the Crocker, which is a jewel in the crown of Sacramento. You're also going to have access to our docent office if anybody needs, where we have computers and reference materials and places to have meetings and do research. There are two sort of main areas that I think that you'll benefit from by being a docent at the Crocker. The first is you get a chance to be of service. Obviously, we know that you're going to be touring, but this year, for the first time, we're going to not just be touring in an analog sense in person. We're also going to be doing some virtual touring. So that's really exciting part of being a docent, but that's the part that you expect. There are other versions of touring that happen all the time that are really rewarding too that you need to know about. I'm only going to talk to you about one of them, but there are many. There's a program that we have put together called Bus on Us. The docents put this program together and we fund it. We identify local area schools who could not possibly afford to come to the Crocker. Even if the Crocker waives their admission, which they do, they can't afford the buses to get to the Crocker. So we identify schools that are in this position. We pay for their buses to come to the Crocker, which is not cheap. We give them a docent-led tour, free admission, and then afterwards we give them a 1-hour art class where they get to make a project to take home with them. These are kids who will tell you in the midst of the art class that they've never held a paintbrush before. They've never done any art before because it's not a part of their school's curriculum. They just don't have the money for it. Because these kids come in so green, they have no idea what a museum is. They don't know how to behave at a museum, what to expect. To just throw them in on a Friday and expect them to get the most out of it is not realistic. So a group of docents, myself included, will go to their schools the Monday before to have a presentation with them where we talk to them about how we behave in a museum, what a museum is. Are they going to see dinosaurs? How do we interpret art? All the kind of things that museum readiness is what I would call it. So that then when they come on Friday, they get the most out of it. And that's done entirely by the docents. That's a program I'm very proud of. And there are many other programs like that beyond just typical touring in the museum that you'll be able to involve yourself with. Mentoring to help each other's skills is, well, it's not required that you be in a study group, but many docents find that it's a benefit to them while they're in training to carve themselves up into smaller groups and to help one another. But of course, you're also going to have the mentoring help of the veteran docent mentor to whom each of you will be assigned. But here's the thing, this is the important one to me, a social benefit. This was a surprise to me. I expected to enjoy learning about art. I expected to enjoy being of service to the community and to the Crocker. The social part of it really hadn't crossed my mind when I began. And yet, it's turned out to be one of the most important things for me. Not only is the docent community as a whole cohesive and supportive, but your training class in particular, your classmates, the bond that you'll form with these people, because you're on such a roller coaster together, you have such a common purpose and common experiences. The bonds that you form with your training class are powerful. I'm still as tight as family members to the people in my training class. In fact, I see a couple of them in the room with us today. We've been through births, funerals, weddings together. We go on vacation together in museums. As an adult, making new friends is not the easiest thing in the world, especially not new friends with such shared interests. So suddenly you're thrown in with a group of people, fascinating people, but whose lives and interests and work experiences are so different than yours that normally you would never have intersected. Because of this classroom, it throws you all together and boom, suddenly you've got this huge circle of friends that you never had before. That's a wonderful thing for an adult. Study groups fall into that same category, and docents also take, well, let's see how this works out in the next year, but typically we take field trips to area art activities and art museums in San Francisco, to Stanford, to here and there. And then we also have events and receptions, like we'll have luncheons, we'll have things to get together. It's a very social group. And I think that that's the part that surprised me the most and the part that maybe I've gotten the most out of. Certainly, I know you'll enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Sam.
Yeah.
I would like to outline what docent service looks like. So upon graduating from the training class, how you can expect to serve as an active docent of the Crocker Art Museum. So I'd like to talk about how service looked a year ago before COVID-19. There is a very good chance we will return to this service after the virus there's a vaccine or after it's left the community. So I wanted you to know what you're probably signing up for to serve, or how to serve as an eventual docent. So generally speaking, you will join a touring team. That team will be consistent for a year. The teams, for example, would be first and third Tuesday morning, second and fourth Thursday evening, first and third Saturday. Once you're on that team, you're going to come in twice a month, so first and third, second and fourth, and you're going to tour for 2 hours. You can highlight the permanent collection and also special exhibitions or do themed tours. You are required to tour and serve 44 hours a year. If you can do some quick math there, you'll see that there are some times when you can not be there for your shift and still meet your hours. We do ask docents, if they're not going to be there for their shift, to arrange for a substitute. But you are required as an active docent to serve 44 hours a year. You're also required to log and keep track of those hours using our online database. We use Volgistics, and that's that same one. If you don't know what that means or how to use it, that's fine. That's that same one that you will be applying to the program through. It's pretty seamless, and once you get in there, we'll train you on how to use it in the back end. But docents are required to keep track of their own touring hours in that database. Now, the board and staff are still meeting to determine the specifics on how docents are going to serve during COVID-19. But what we're looking at is dividing docents into 3 sort of working groups. The first would be virtual touring, so live or pre-recorded. The second will be for people who want to opt in and tour in the museum during COVID while the museum is open. So some people will be doing in-person touring, and then some people will be doing analog or independent study service. I mention those 3 groups because you will start to see glimpses of them during your touring and working with your mentor docents. And depending on the course the virus takes, that may be the environment where you start your docent service is in one of those 3 service groups. In addition to touring, active docents have to participate in continuing education. So we offer 1 to 2, we call them colloquiums or colloquia. We offer 1 to 2 a month. And most of the time, they're going to prep you on the temporary exhibitions that are coming through. So curators, staff, and guest speakers will come and talk to you about the art or other applicable touring techniques or ideas. We'll include art history and touring practice. There's a committee of docents made up to decide what continuing education opportunities are offered. An active touring docent is required to get 12 continuing education credits per year. You must also maintain a docent council membership, which is $40 a year for active docents. That $40 goes to the docent council and is used for docent activities. We also ask that you maintain a current museum membership. For this class in particular, digital applications are going to go out in the next 2 weeks. Those will come to you via email, and there'll be a link that you go online to do the application. They will be due via this digital submission by Friday, July 24th. Between that date, late July and August, Sam and I and other mentor docents will conduct virtual interviews with you to meet you and learn a little bit more about you. And then we will notify you of submission, and class will begin on Wednesday, September 3rd. We're going to go into our question and answer period now. So Michelle, I'm going to kind of throw it over to you. Do you have any questions in the chat you want to bring up, or can you see everyone and kind of facilitate questions that they may have?
So we haven't had any questions in the chat yet, but people can add them if they like, or go for it, really.
Or wiggle around, or
Okay, we do have a question. What is slow art?
oh, that's a good one. Let's
That's a
see.
good
Can
one.
I throw that to a docent? Does anyone want to cover that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Slow art is one of my favorite things that we do at the museum. We've found that when people are in a museum, they'll typically spend less than a few seconds in front of a painting before they whiz off to the next one. Slow art is a type of touring technique that helps people slow down and pay attention to a piece of art for a substantial amount of time. What we do is we'll gather in front of one specific piece of art with folding chairs where everyone will sit down and they'll spend a half an hour talking about this one piece of art. Now there's a docent involved, but the docent is just facilitating the conversation amongst the participants in the group. It's really them talking, not the docent. The docent just kind of gooses them and leaves the conversation along. The docent will let the conversation go in whatever direction it wants to go. And some of the most fascinating ideas bubble up over the course of these. They happen, I think, once a month. You can look for them in the art letter, and I would suggest that when we start having them in person again, that you give it a shot. They're a wonderful way to really get in deep on a painting.
Our next question is, how big an incoming class are you expecting for this next year? That's from Barbara.
Yeah, Yeah, so the size of our classes has fluctuated over time depending on what we're capable of handling and depending on the needs of the docent body. Because we're entering this virtual realm and it's sort of new for us, I'm thinking we will want to start with 25 or 26 docents and then hope to graduate close to that number.
Okay. And then I think that kind of addressed, Tony also had a question about how many docents is the program looking to accept. We had another question.
That's a moderately large size class for us, just to give you an idea.
Someone wanted to know what is ASMAT?
Oh, the Asmat people live on the island of Papua New Guinea. So it's included in our oceanic collection. If you've been to the museum, the second floor atrium of the Teal Family Pavilion of the new building, there's our African art sort of down at the end of the hall, and then our Osmot and oceanic collection takes up the rest of the space. If you can imagine, it seems like a lifetime ago, but imagine being in the museum and down in that first floor cafe area, there's like carvings of canoes and the very tall beige poles that come up. Those are the Osmot collection.
Thanks. So Sonia had a couple questions about what is the selection process based on? How do you choose applicants?
I think Sam and I can each answer this because we're both involved and I think we look at it very similarly, but we might have some different responses. I know when I go into the interview portion, which is where I learn the most about applicants, I'm looking for personality traits and soft skills more than anything. So I don't tend to pay a lot of attention to work experience or background knowledge or how much art history you've had. While everybody's individual experience will be important for how they enter into and contribute to the class, what I'm looking more for if people have the personality traits and demeanor that will allow them to succeed in the class. So those slides that Sam went over about always wanting to learn, you know, there's a reflective period to this because we're learning something new and we're learning it together, and that can be a little sticky sometimes. So being comfortable with that discomfort, having a sense of humor, and then also the dedication are some of the things that I'm looking for. And I find people that succeed the most have those traits. Sam, do you want to add to that?
No, I couldn't have said that any better. That's exactly the way I feel. Yeah.
Thank you. The other question next was, are docents trained for art security issues? Is that a growing concern for the museum?
Docents, there will always be security in the museum. Docents are trained for sort of how to interact with security when situations arise. So we do actually, usually it's the very last training class before you go on the floor. You do an extensive security training and walkthrough with our security director. So you know how to do that. But most of the time, docents are advised and required to just alert security staff when something arises. We do cover that.
Can I add one
yes,
thing, Mallory?
please.
If any of you have spent any time in LA, for instance, in any of the museums there, you'll see a trend where the docents are the security. That's not the case at the Crocker. We have a security staff that handles those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Loren wanted to know, when will the emails go out inviting us to submit our application?
The next 2 weeks. If I'm ambitious next week, it'll be next week, but just in case, it may be the following. And there will be, I will send that via email. It'll be a link. And then we'll also update the webpage to have the link as well. So just in case you don't see the email or something funny happens with your inbox, it'll be on that docent page as well. And it's open to anyone. You did not have to attend today in order to apply. So if you thought of somebody during the duration of the presentation today, they're more than welcome to apply. We did record this session and we will post it online for people so they can get this information, but attendance today was not required. So feel free to share that link far and wide. Go ahead, Sam.
Let me make a quick plea. I'm on the diversity committee and I'm specifically on the subcommittee that's trying to assemble a training class that's as diverse as possible. Bob mentioned we're looking for gender diversity, racial diversity, diversity of work experience, diversity of age. So with that in mind, if you know anybody within your orbit who might add to our training class in an interesting way, please get the word out to them. We have only 20% men versus 80% women, for instance, and it'd be nice for us if it was 50-50. It's a great fit for retirees, but it sure would be good if we could get some young people in there as well. They bring a different perspective. So any of you who are on the Zoom conference today, if you know anybody, please get the word out to them as well.
And this class in particular, being held in the evenings and weekends, we only do that every other time. So it's every 3 or 4 years that this opportunity arises to try and accommodate people who are working or still in school. So because it'll be in Thursdays and on those Saturdays, if you know anybody that wants to do it now and maybe not wait 3 or 4 years for another evening or weekend class, now would be a good time to apply. We do take students, so we have some undergraduate students or graduate students that are looking for new ways to learn and new ways to serve. So my favorite part about last year's class, and I said it all the time, was we had 3 students that were born in the 90s, and that was a record for us. So we are looking to take people who are still working and really people from all different backgrounds.
Next question was in regards to the slide that had 3 categories of touring: in person, virtual, and then a 3rd category pertaining to independent study. Can you elaborate on the 3rd category?
Everybody wants elaboration there. So that I think is going to be largely docent driven. I'm meeting with the board Monday to determine what those service categories are going to look like. That is a good example of how the education department works in tandem with the board and the docent council. The education department very rarely and really never makes huge impact decisions without counseling and agreeing with the board. So we're going to be doing that Monday and talking about how that is going to look. But really, that's in my head kind of the other category. So if I were a docent, I'm not very comfortable with online technology, so I wouldn't want to tour virtually. I don't think I'd want to come into the museum because of the safety and health considerations, but I still might want to serve. So maybe I like to do research. I might do research and type that up to share with the docents. We're talking about maybe doing a pen pal program with schools or assisted living facilities. There are people that are talking about making masks to distribute or making posters with collection images and written things about it. It's really just going to be a catch-all for people who want to serve that don't fall into one of those 2 early categories. I think those measures are going to be in place during the run of the coronavirus, and then when that is gone, so hopefully around the time you graduate or within a year of that, we'll go back to sort of our more normal touring structure. But that's going to be in place. We're trying to accommodate all 130 docents that we have and give them ways to serve during this period.
We had a specific question about ArtRx. Are docents guiding the ArtRx program experienced or beginners?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it sounds like somebody that's familiar with some of our programs. Generally, docents who begin touring will tour on a team for a year or 2 before they get into specialized programs like that. So the ArtRx docents are more experienced and get more specialized training after they've already served for a year or 2. We will cover some of the basic tenets of the program and of slow art and of artful meditation and all of those different facets of touring, but we do ask that docents tour for a year or 2 before they really get into specialization.
Next question, I think you addressed this quickly, but will you be able to post today's presentation or the slides on an accessible website?
Yes, we will post them. I'm not sure actually where yet. I have to talk to the tech gods, but yes, they will be posted.
And then a question about the interview. What kinds of questions will you ask in the interviews?
Oh, Sam, do you want to cover that?
It's a very informal conversation. We're going to ask you a kind of free-form set of questions that are really just designed to get a feel for your personality and how you interact with people. It sounds like you want me to give away the secret questions, but there are no secret questions. It's just a conversation where we're going to try and determine how you would behave, for instance, if you were in a tour and someone on the tour had a strong difference of opinion with you. How might you go about dealing with that sort of? It's those kind of questions. There's no gotchas in the interview. Don't worry.
And it's about 20 or 30 minutes in person. We've never done them online, but they take about 20 or 30 minutes.
We also had someone who wanted to know, how do docents get involved in the Docent Council and its committees?
Can I answer that?
Yes.
I was confused by this too. You're going to hear us use the word Docent Council. And to me, that always sounded like Docent Council. That sounds like a board of directors. That's not what it is. The Docent Council is the term that we use to just mean the docent pool. If you take all 130 docents together, we call ourselves the Docent Council. However, we do have a board. We do have a Docent Council board that's of about 12 people who serve as our board of directors. It's the kind of board where everybody has a job. It's a working board. You're not eligible to be on it for a couple of years until you have some experience. But after that, all you have to do is express an interest to the board, and there's a nominations committee that'll talk to you and decide who they feel would be a good fit for the board.
If you have a large pool of docents, where do you see room for the new docents that will graduate from this class? Is this a growing need?
So there is always docent attrition. Because of the amount of time it takes to train docents. So at least we're looking at 9 months. And then the first couple of months you practice. So kind of a year from today to when you're really on your feet, plus the year we take off because we only run them every other year. We're only bringing on, a basket of people really every 2 years. So there's some natural attrition. We also really have needed for really about the last 10 years since the Teal Family Pavilion opened to jump our docent numbers. So right now the museum provides tours and service for as many docents as we have. We're kind of maxed out. We don't overwork our docents. We haven't increased the amount they need to serve. So in order to meet a growing need for the museum, we need to bring on more docents. So at times, I think a year ago, we were at about 150 docents. And again, that was still kind of at the max. They were serving the maximum that they could on those twice monthly shifts. So we are always looking to increase our docent numbers. Frankly, the class size, by the time you graduate and really get on the floor, will probably still be at about 130, 150 docents. In order to get it to really jump, we need to run classes of like 40 people, which we have done, but we're not going to do this time because of the online virtual component. Plus, we're also always looking for fresh blood, new ideas to come in. We want to be questioned about how we work. We want fresh ideas. I'm also particularly interested in this training class. I liken the trainees in this class to be like that generation of people who only grew up with the internet in their home, so they think differently about how they live their life, whereas somebody where docents who did their training mostly in person and had to then adapt to technology will think differently about touring. So I'm also very excited for the prospect there.
Let me talk just a second about attrition. I think it's important to, Mallory mentioned that we need to add new docents because of attrition. But let me point out that when we say attrition, for the most part, we mean maybe life gets in the way. Maybe someone has health problems. Maybe their grandbabies are born in Seattle and they want to move there. As far as docents just not liking it and just leaving because they've had enough, that doesn't really happen. It's a great gig, you guys. People who come in stay. We have docents who have been there, 25 years, 28 years?
30, I think Nancy just did 30.
So, yeah, so attrition is, when life gets in the way, it's generally not because people just don't like it, because we love what we do.
I think the sort of average length of docent service is 8 or 9 years.
So Stacy, those of you who are here for the beginning, our Director of Education wanted me to share also the idea that sometimes we can sense that the commitment needed for the program may not work at a certain time for an applicant, and we may suggest that they apply at another time. And that can happen. Applicants may not get in 1 year, but they can get in the next. Mallory, if you wanted to add to that or not.
Sure, I'm glad Stacy brought that up. We have some wonderful docents who did not get in the first time they tried, and it was for a variety of reasons, and we're also very transparent whenever anybody asks, you know, why we thought that wasn't the best fit at the time. But we always encourage people to look into it or to apply again. And oftentimes, like I said, I can count, it's on one hand, but I can count on one hand really wonderful active docents we have that didn't get in or complete the class on their first go around.
Next question was, can you give us an idea of how detailed the application may be?
Oh, sure. You know, I was going to include the questions there. It's been about 2 years since I looked at it, but oh man, if anyone else can sort of remember. It's not very intense stuff. I know we ask for a reference. We ask about your arts background. We asked about your volunteering or service background. We ask why you want to be a docent.
And there's one other thing. There's an essay.
Oh, there is. I forgot.
There's
Yeah,
an
I've
essay.
never done it. I've never done it. That's fine. It's like a page. We ask you to write about a page about yourself, just sort of telling us about yourself. And we will, I should note, there will be those access and accessibility questions about the hardware and about the scholarship. There are also going to be comprehensive questions about your demographics, and that is part of our diversity and inclusion initiative. We need to know where we are and where we are going in order to have metrics to measure the docent population. So we have all of that information compiled for our active docents for the last training class, and we will ask those demographic questions for the next training class as well. And that's just to make sure we can measure how we're moving the numbers and making our docent population as diverse as we can.
Second, this looks like the last question so far. Can docents design tours of types of works in the collection that are their particular areas of interest, for example, sacred, industrial, women artists, or are the tours preset?
Sam and I just got huge smiles on our face. You guys can't see. Sam, do you want to cover that?
Yes.
I'm surprised we didn't.
Have any of you ever been to museums where the docent seems to have just memorized a script? That's not what we do. The answer to that person's question is yes to both of those. You are allowed to involve your personal background and interests in tours, but here's how it works. A school, for instance, the school tour will request one of our, say, 5 different types of tours. They might request a tour called California Canvas, which is supposed to be about California art then and now. Beyond that, it's up to the docent to determine which pieces of art they want to show, which big idea, sort of uniting theme they want to come up with. They come up with all the questions that they want to ask and everything that's going to be said. So it is not the case that you're parroting back a script. You're concocting the tours yourself. However, if you said, I'm a scientist and I only want to give tours about science, that's a little too specific. That would limit you a little bit too much. But yes, you can absolutely involve your own personal interest in it.
Tours are better that way.
What's that?
Tours are better that way.
The tours are absolutely better that way. Yeah.
Part of the reason the training is so extensive is because we do not provide scripts for tours. We do not provide tour outlines. You're trained, you have a very comprehensive training because you will write and conduct your own tours.
Should we talk about the mock tours that we do, the 4 sample tours? During the course of your training, you're going to be assigned 4 major presentations. Each of those is sort of a mock tour. The first one is only going to be about one piece of art. You're going to have 7 minutes to discuss one piece of art. And in the past, we've said, imagine that you're giving this to a group of, say, 3rd graders. At that point, we don't trust you yet to be set free on actual 3rd graders. So your classmates portray those people and you give a mock tour to them about one piece of art for 7 minutes. A few months later, when you've got a little bit more experience, you put together 2 pieces of art for 15 minutes this time. Again, your classmates are pretending to be 4th graders this time. A few months later, you'll do a 3rd tour. This one is in conjunction with your mentor. The 2 of you are going to give an actual tour for real humans this time, where you'll do half of the pieces and your mentor will do half of the pieces. And then finally for the 4th tour, that's the big one. That's sort of like your final exam. That's an actual tour. You're giving the whole thing in front of real people, and there are docents with clipboards circling around in the background like sharks, taking note of what you say. All of those can be a little bit intimidating, but of course, those are the exercises that your mentor is going to work very closely with you to make sure that by the time you have to give it, you've practiced it a bunch of times, you feel comfortable with it. They're really fun. They're very real world problems, but the last one is the one that you need to get a sort of a good result on in order to pass and graduate and become a docent.
And then we should also note active docents also participate in required evaluations. So there is a peer evaluation every 3 years for active docents. So you will select and give a tour, and 2 other docents will watch you and follow you around with those clipboards. It's mostly a learning tool for you to sort of check where you're at. You can ask questions about what you want help with moving forward as you progress as a docent. So that's every 3 years for active docents. The evaluations do continue.
Yeah.
Here's a good one. Do any of the docents use notes during their tour?
Oh, that's the big question, isn't it?
Sam and I disagree.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sam.
I am of the opinion that you shouldn't use notes. I know that's a little scary, but it's sort of an industry-wide thing where I feel like, and many of the veteran docents feel like, it sort of undermines your credibility if you have to keep referring to notes. It's much easier for it to be more conversational and free-flowing. So I come down on the side of no notes. Mallory?
I use notes. Mostly because I have a lot of theory. We can talk about this in person sometime, but I do think that there is a way that you can use notes in an effective way that does not impact the result of a tour. Now, most of the time people use notes, that doesn't happen. It does sort of get in the way and it does everything Sam described. But I think as a learning and a teaching tool, there is a way to pull it off.
Yeah,
so the door
it should be
is
noted.
open on
It should be noted that Mallory is a pro, a veteran. She's been doing this for a long time. As a trainee, the temptation is to rely on notes as a crutch. And I think that sort of deadens your tour.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Here's a good one too. In case this was not already covered, I'd like to know what the cost and fees associated with the training program and/or application are. Second, I understand you can express interest in a scholarship in your application. Is there any way to get this info ahead of time before the July 24th submission deadline? Transparency about the scholarship may help make this program more available to diverse applicants.
Yes, very good questions. There is no application fee. Once you get through the interview process and you are accepted into the class, then if applicable, you will pay the $250 training fee. Anybody that indicates that they are interested in a scholarship in the application, or really, I guess, the interview period too, will get one. So if you say you want or need one, then it's really the fee is being waived. Once you're in the class, all of the required training materials will be provided. So there isn't like a cost for a textbook or anything like that. You're gonna have a binder that starts out about 1/2 inch thick and ends up about 4 inches thick. Maybe this time it might be online. That was a thought. Well, we'll give you all the materials that you need. Some docents choose to purchase things like the museum catalog or temporary exhibition catalogs. You can do that if you would like, but any catalog that's like in the store or relevant to touring, there's going to be a copy available in the docent office. Most of those you cannot check out and take home, but you're free anytime the museum's open to sit in the office, to read from them, to take notes, to make copies of the pages. There's a copier in the office. So we try to make that available to you. You don't have to buy those things. A lot of people want them and do purchase them, but they will be in the docent office. Really the only fee that we don't work around yet is your museum membership that we are going to require you have during training and then during the class. And really that is so you can have full access and communication with the museum. So that is a cost that's associated with the class and with touring. Once you graduate, there's also a $40 fee paid to the docent council that, as far as we go, you know, where we stand right now today, there are not scholarships to cover that, but that is something that we're discussing. And if you need any more clarity on that, feel free to ask.
Does your docent training program work with other museums or docent training programs, collaborations?
We do work with other museums. The last class we had, the woman that comes in to speak to VTS, Visual Thinking Strategies, is the director at the Pence Gallery in Davis. We also have a docent from the Fine Arts Museum San Francisco. She comes out and does the iPad touring and training. And then a lot of the readings and other resources that we pull are from other museums around the country.
We should talk about one other perk, perhaps, of being a docent. When you talk about working with other museums, I don't know if you can see this on camera, but this is my my docent badge that you'll all get and carry around with you. Most museums have at least an informal agreement with other museums that docents from one museum typically get in free to other museums. So if you're traveling, it works at the Louvre, I'll tell you that. As you're traveling around the country, make sure that any vacation that you take this card, this badge with you. And occasionally it doesn't work. I think maybe at the Huntington it didn't, but in most museums it does get you in free. So that's a nice perk.
We had a couple questions around, it looks like, continuing education. So one was, are there magazines you suggest for subscriptions? What do donors recommend reading? I think maybe, I'm not sure if she meant docents for ongoing education and industry knowledge. And then, will we have access to the museum's library, to our papers, research online or in person?
Bob, do you mind if I throw that over to you? I know you use the library quite a bit.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Actually, there are tremendous resources in that library. It's goes back. It was actually the library of a member, but it's a full range of, well, the history of art. You can find things on lots of individual painters. You can find theme things as well. Down there are also magazines. So basically, I use the library probably from like my second or third week of training, and I'm in there pretty constantly. It's definitely worth using. The thing is, if you want help with the library, you have to be there on the days when the librarian's there. She's part-time, so she's not there all the time. But to be specific, then, you don't need to buy any extra magazines or get any other types of subscriptions, because the resources are already there for you.
It's a little known fact too, Bob, that you don't have to be a docent to use that library.
That's
it's
true.
Just that the general public sort of doesn't realize that it's there or that it's even open. But in fact, anytime the museum's open, the library's open, and anyone who's a visitor to the museum is allowed to use that library.
Yeah.
Oh, we had one more question related to the, let's see if I can find it. Will we get feedback on the final tour by ourselves? And if there are problems, do you get another chance?
Yes.
It's too early to be worried about that right now. You'll have 10 months to worry about that.
Yeah.
But yes. Yes, we have never gotten somebody to that final point and said, well, it was nice knowing you, but this isn't going to work out. Instead, what happens sometimes for people, and sometimes it's driven by the docent themselves saying, I don't feel ready. And sometimes it's driven by their mentor or staff saying, you need to do some more observations. Sometimes people will kind of enter this like observation period where they will observe more tours and then redo their final tour before they go onto the floor. So sometimes that happens, but I mean, I've probably graduated close to 90 docents in my time at the museum, and I think that's happened 5 or 6 times.
But I'll also say that some of those people who ended up having to repeat their final exam ended up being some of the best docents that we have.
Yes.
So people are on different time frames. It takes some people longer, but we'll get you there.
There was a question about, are docents required to reside within Sacramento County, which Stacy answered in the chat. We've had docents from San Francisco before, so. Stacy also mentioned, if you're not following the chat, there's also a bibliography that we give trainees, and we give out a ton of articles in tandem with topics in the course. The other question about the continuing education, the 12 units or credits mentioned, is that something we would enroll in at a local community college?
So there are additional ways to receive CE credit. So if you're working or you can't make the schedule work and you don't come to the museum's colloquia provided for docents, you can earn some of your credits by doing things like that. So you just get approval first, you take the course or you do the tour or whatever it is, and then you write a page or two about it, but you cannot get all of your credits that way. I think it's, maybe 3 or 4 per year you can do that for, but otherwise you need to be getting them through the museum so we can sort of control the flow of information.
Yeah, and the colloquia that the museum's going to provide are fantastic. You're going to want to go to these things.
They're very special.
Yeah, they're special.
Yeah, but the point is you may not be able to go if you work.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the other things we've done, that was part of the work of the diversity committee, is to set up tours of all new exhibits for working docents. So you'll have a way to get the experience of the colloquium.
Mm-hmm. And actually, we didn't mention, for working docents, I should have put this in, but for working docents, your CE requirements and touring hours are reduced. I'm sorry I didn't mention that before. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if you are working while you are actively touring, that 44 hours and 12 credits is reduced.
Mallory, when we're talking about how much does it cost and where's their scholarship, should we talk about parking at all?
We can. Yeah,
it's an issue. People always want to know. Docents have to pay for parking. Just know that.
Staff has to pay for parking too.
Yeah, everybody does.
Everybody.
Because the Crocker doesn't own those parking lots. The city does. We can point you to some deals that you can get with some parking garages in the vicinity that can get you a pretty cheap deal on it. But just know that that's an issue, and at least currently I don't think there's a scholarship for that. Is that correct, Mallory?
Not for parking.
Yeah, so carpool, walk, take the bus. These are also other options, but
bike, we have docents that bike.
There's not a scholarship for parking, but the city has an arrangement that if your income is below a certain amount, you can park at the tower garage for a reduced amount.
Yeah, I know a lot of docents that are doing that, and it's relatively inexpensive. So.
Yeah. Final question, it looks like. Is there a schedule provided on when and where to obtain the CEs?
Oh, yes. Yeah, you're given that. So our year runs like a school year, a touring year. So it goes, technically July, but really we get started by about September. So September through May or June. You're provided with that schedule, with the topics, the credits, the times, the places, the dates, all of that at the start of the year in September. So yes, you have that in advance. It also follows a pattern, so you'll be able to predict when they happen. And as a training docent, we should mention, the classes do not overlap with those colloquiums this time because we're training in the evening and the weekend. But as a training docent, you are eligible to attend all of those colloquia if you would like. It's not required and you're not going to get credit for it. But if you want to go to those are going to be open to you at the start of training in September.
That's all we have.
I think. Great. And look at that, 11:57. I'm impressed.
Wow, very good.
Well, I would like to personally thank Michelle on the back end for running the tech for me. Stacy, thank you for being here this morning and offering your insight and information in the beginning. Thank you, Bob, for answering some questions and for covering the work of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Betsy, thank you for popping in to see everything and talk about the history of docents. Sam, thank you for today and for the last 4 years and for the next 2 years for everything you do for training docents. And thank you to everybody, staff, active docents and prospective trainees that tuned in today to learn a little bit more about our program. I hope we were able to answer the questions that you need answered. If and when you think of any questions, comments, or concerns between now and the application period, you can always email me with those and I will get back to you about it. Expect an email from me with a link for the application in the next week or two. Have a wonderful day. Thank you everybody for participating. I hope to meet you in the next few months. Be well and stay cool, and we'll see you again at the Crocker as soon as we can. Bye everybody.